You are worried and distracted by many things. Oh, yes, you did laugh. I love to tell stories. I love to look at scripture stories of people and find ways to see how their lives and the things they lived with, the dilemmas they faced, are related to our lives and our stories. We have two familiar stories in today's readings about encounters with the holy. The story about Abraham and Sarah with the three strangers, and the story of Martha and Mary. At first glance, when I was looking at them, I could not see how they were related. There are always so many layers to the stories. Sometimes we need to keep looking and listening to find the one that speaks to us. It will always be different each time we approach a story, no matter how familiar the story. The circumstances of our lives change. We carry those changes into the story each time we read them. When things happen to us or to those whom we love, we might read the story differently. Beyond our own lives and stories, we look at what is happening around us and in the world. The stories from Scripture speak to those happenings as well. I found for now that both stories spoke to me about hospitality and what might happen if we learn to open our hearts and homes to the holy. We never really know when we might encounter the holy, when we might come face to face with messengers from God, when we might ourselves be hosts to Jesus. Biblical hospitality is a radical hospitality. It is not about inviting people over for dinner. That means we are to welcome the stranger, the sojourner, into our home. It is about giving them water to wash their feet, providing for their animals. It is about giving them shelter and protection, along with a sumptuous meal. We as the host never know when we might need the help and hospitality of strangers if we become a sojourner in a strange land. And we never know who we might be entertaining. They might be messengers from God. It might be Jesus. In our Old Testament story, we find Abraham and Sarah camping near the Oaks of Mamre, which was possibly located near the modern-day city of Hebron, about 18 miles south of Jerusalem. It is noon when we enter the story. It is the hottest time of the day. And Abraham seems to be resting at the opening of his tent when three strangers appear. And there is no guessing about who they are. The story tells us they are from God. They have been called messengers. They've been called angels from God. Rublev depicts them as angels in his famous icon, the Trinity. Abraham, being the good host, invites them to sit in the shade of the oak trees nearby. He offers them water to wash with as he runs off first to the tent to ask Sarah to prepare bread for them, as he goes off to choose a fatted calf and has his servants prepare and roast the calf. When all is ready, he serves the bread and the meat with some curds and milk, a sumptuous meal, all in accordance with accepted and expected hospitality. Abraham then stands by them under the trees while they eat. And one of those strangers turns to Abraham and asks, "Where's your wife?" And then the story takes off. We soon learn the reason for this visit and the purpose of the story. The stranger tells Abraham that in a year they will return, and by then Sarah will have given birth to a son. The suggested reading for today ended here, right here. They left out the best part of the story, but you guys got to hear it because we added it. So in what comes next, we are told that Abraham and Sarah are old. Both are near 100. The suggestion that they might have a child together now is laughable. And I guess most of us here looking around, if we were told that we might have a child now, we might laugh. You could almost see Sarah listening to all this behind the tent flap? Did she wonder who these strangers were, or did she know there was something other than ordinary sojourners? How many of us would fix a meal for 3 strangers who knocked at our door? But then that wouldn't happen here and now, would it? We do not live in ancient Palestine. We do not have the sort of expectation that we are to care for the strangers, except, which I learned today, if you live in the South, when there's always cake waiting. There's no cake waiting here. So we aren't asked or expected to do what Abraham did. Or are we? Aren't we asked to care for those in need of shelter, in need of protection, in the need of food? Would we ever do what Abraham did automatically? This is not Abraham's first encounter with God. Abraham had conversations with God before. He left his home in Ur because, which was a good distance away, because God called him and told him to do that. What does God call us to do? Do we ever step up with such a radical response to God's calling to us? And there is Sarah, listening, thinking, this is utter nonsense. A baby, a child, when I'm long past childbearing years, and Abraham, as old as he is. So she laughs. And the stranger hears her laughter, the laughter that she thought she had hidden. Have you ever thought to yourself, God is too busy to notice me, or to be worried about all the small things that happen in my life? I know I've told you before this story, I'm pretty sure I have, about my son when he was 3 or 4 years old, fighting with his sister in the back of our station wagon. And my daughter, who was only a year older, says to her at that time, God would not like what you are doing. Remaining silent, I look in the rearview mirror and I saw my son looking around at the roof of the car. And he says to his sister, God can't see me through the roof of the car. I said nothing at first because I was afraid I would burst out laughing. I think there are times when we are just like my son. There are times when we think that we can hide from God. Nothing can be hidden from God, and nothing is impossible with God. As Mary learned, when an angel came to her telling her that she, a young virgin, was going to have a child. And then there's Elizabeth, Mary's cousin, who learned as Sarah did, that though she was barren, she too would have a son. They all learn that nothing is impossible with God. God sees and knows all. When the stranger confronts Sarah as she tries to lie and say, I did not laugh, the stranger says to her, oh yes, you did laugh. Do we ever laugh at the notion that nothing is impossible with God? It takes stopping to pay attention to see God at work. It takes time to be the hands and feet and arms of those who might make the impossible possible with God's help. Jesus and his disciples are still on their way to Jerusalem in today's gospel. They stop at a village along the way, and Martha invites them in to rest. And the story is so simply told here that we do not know if she offered them water to wash with. We do know, however, that they entered the home and are settled in enough to be sitting around Jesus and listening to him speak in her home. We know this because the story tells us that Mary is there sitting and listening at his feet. We are told that Martha is like Abraham, rushing around to prepare a meal for this crowd like the good host that she is. And I can see her running around fixing bread, looking into her supplies, deciding what she can serve from what she has, and glancing each time more angrily at Mary, just sitting there doing nothing. You can almost hear Martha muttering under breath, grumbling to herself. That's what she does always. She never lifts a hand to help. She, Martha, would like to sit there and have Mary do the work. She can't stand it, so she says something to Jesus. It is then, at that moment, that we know that Jesus is not a stranger in this home. He has been here before. Martha has heard at some point for herself what Jesus is about. There's something very close to her being in this house, in this home with him. There's a familial sort of feeling here. She calls him Lord. So perhaps at that point, she pulls him aside to speak to him privately, though loudly enough for others to hear. Lord, you do not care that my sister has left me to do all the work? Are we ever like Martha, running around, getting things done in the kitchen or in the garden or wherever, wanting help and feeling as though we do all the work? I can raise my hand to that. I found myself there. And what about Jesus' words to Martha? Is he chiding her gently? Some would say no. However, there is something in the words, Martha, Martha, that imply he is more sad than angry with her. As he says to her, you are worried and distracted by many things. Jesus is telling her that she too could be sitting there with Mary. He is telling her that in the end, all of those other things will be well. All of those other things will be taken care of. We know Jesus knew that there would be few meals shared in this way now that he has almost reached Jerusalem. There will be few times for her to stop, to listen, and to be. So yes, Mary, for this time, has chosen the better thing. I do not believe Jesus is saying to Martha that what Martha was doing is not necessary. It's not about an either or. Things do need to be cared for, and sometimes we just need to stop and listen and be. To stop and let God's voice rise above the noise of our busyness. We can miss God's voice and God's calling to us. We can laugh at God's calling to us, saying, we are too old to do anything, or we are too busy doing important things. We all have excuses about not being present. If we stop and listen and allow our hearts to be open to what might seem impossible, we might know that God's abundant hospitality and ongoing gift of love is always there for us. And in the end, nothing is impossible with God.